$17,000. That's how much I paid. Not as a gift, but as a promise to see her drive toward a better life. My daughter's car, her freedom, her start. I skipped vacations, sold old jewelry, told myself it was worth it. Then, over coffee, she looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you hold me back." I didn't argue. I just nodded, the way you do when you realize you've been financing someone else's wings while standing still yourself. Before the story begins, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Ruth Delaney. I'm 60 years old. I keep a small house that faces morning light white curtains that move when the harbor breeze remembers me. A kettle that sings on cue, 2 cups on the shelf, though I mostly pour for one. The habit of a second cup is hard to break. Like most habits born from love and long practice. I know how to balance a ledger by hand. I learned in rooms where fluorescent lights made every mistake look louder. I carried other people's debts until they came due. I collected their interests and their stories. I signed my name at the bottom of pages that were never about me. And I paid attention for a living, which is another way of saying I paid in ways that never show up on paper. Olivia is my daughter, 28 and bright as noon, restless as weather. She works in marketing. She tells me her job is to invite strangers to want what they already wanted. She smiles when she says it, and I try not to hear the echo of our home in that line. $17,000, that is the number I sent into the world across 18 months. Not as a gift, as a promise to myself that my child would drive toward a better life. Each payment, a small shovelful clearing the road in front of her, each transfer a quiet sentence go on. I will stand still if that helps you move. I skipped trips. I sold the ring my mother left me and told myself diamonds are only rocks that got lucky. I cooked what was in the pantry and called it a plan. I stretched the good lotion and watered the garden at dusk so the hose would not hiss. Judgment at me at noon. I told myself it was worth it because mothers learn early to rename sacrifice until it sounds like wisdom. When the car arrived on the lot, Olivia sent me a picture that smelled like new plastic and hope her hand on the hood like a pledge. Her eyes catching the light I used to see when she was 5 and had discovered she could read without my finger under the words. We stood together by the sales office while Ms. Patel from First City Auto Finance arranged papers into a tower that almost looked kind. Olivia bounced once on her toes, then again, then again. I signed where the yellow flags told me to sign. Co-signer secondary payer backup plan. The ink was dry before the understanding was. I would not feel it until later. Marcus, my ex-husband, called that night to deliver philosophy from a safe distance. Tough love is the only love that works after 20. He said, "You make it too easy for her." I listened to the voice of a man who had always chosen speeches over support. I folded laundry. I made the bed. I put a check in the mail the next morning and did not tell him. Olivia drove away often. Beach weekends, city dinners, a photo at sunset, with a caption that said, "Earned it a boomerang of iced coffee twirling across the center console," hashtags that glittered like confetti. I would be sweeping, later I pressed, like and pretended the heart meant connection. Mothers can live on a long diet of pretend if no one stops them. Sometimes the calls came from Miss Patel, always gentle, always relentless. "Mrs. Delaney, the auto pay did not clear this month. Would you like to authorize a backup?" Her questions were architecture, no waste, no decoration. I kept my voice level because pride sounds expensive when you cannot afford it. Yes, I would authorize one more time just to keep the account in good standing. Good standing became a phrase I held like prayer beads. Lorna, my next-door neighbor, watched me bring the mail in one evening and said, "Your shoulders are doing too much work." She is 63 and waters her ferns like she is training soldiers. She said, "Ruth, love is not measured by how many fires you put out. It is measured by how many matches you quietly remove from the drawer." I said, "I know, which is what we say when we do not yet know." The months slipped like receipts under a magnet. I stacked statements in a blue folder and wrote her name on the tab, as if that made it a trophy. I told myself I was not keeping score. I was keeping sense. Still, the numbers lined up like a story that was starting to tell itself without asking my permission. Olivia came for coffee on a Tuesday that smelled like rain trying to happen. She wore a new jacket that squeaked when she hugged me. We found a table by the window. Steam rose from her latte like enthusiasm. For a while, we did the dance of ordinary work is work, traffic is traffic, the weather thinks it is the main character again. Then she leaned back and looked at me with the kind of brightness that has already decided its truth. "Mom, you hold me back." The sentence was simple and clean, no tremor, no apology, a flat line across the page of us. I felt the old instinct reach for my purse explain, offer smooth, and I let the instinct sit on my lap and learn stillness. "Hold you back?" I asked. She nodded. "You worry too much. You watch too closely. I cannot grow under supervision." I thought of every payment that had left my card in the dark, each one a quiet hand on her back that she had mistaken for a leash. I thought of the ring I sold the weekends I stayed home and told myself a book by the window is better than a plane. Any day I thought of Miss Petel and her careful voice, and Marcus and his distant theories, and Lorna and her practical ferns, and all the ways a woman can mistake rescue for love. I nodded, not kindly, not cruelly, just steady. I reached for the little leather folder when the bill came, and I put my card inside, and I closed it like a door. Olivia smiled, relieved that we were fine again because the coffee was paid for. We were not fine. We were accurate. I walked home under a sky that could not decide, and I opened the blue folder on my kitchen table, and I took out a clean page, and I wrote one word in my careful bookkeeper hand. Enough. The word did not spark. It did not shout it. Sat there like a well-placed number at the end of a column. True because it balanced what came before it. That night I slept like a person who has been forgiven by herself. The sleep that arrives when a woman decides to stop financing her own invisibility. Morning brought habit tea. The sound of the mailbox lid the news speaking in another room, as if I had asked it to. I took a pen and wrote a short message to Olivia. No more auto payments from my card. Call me when you have a plan, not a promise. I put the phone face down and let the silence settle its shoulders in my house. Marcus called before noon. He said the phrase "just this once" 3 times in a row and sounded proud of his consistency. I said the word "no" once and sounded like someone I had been practicing to be since the day I signed my first ledger. An envelope from First City arrived. Payment past due. It sang in red. Miss Patel would call soon. I made tea for her. In my mind, I pictured her tidy desk and the little plant that had learned to survive fluorescent light. I pictured her looking at my account and seeing the story written there between numbers. The story of a mother who had confused devotion with debit for too long. I visited Olivia that afternoon because memory insists on touch. Her apartment smelled like citrus spray and the kind of candle that promises wealth. On the counter, I saw receipts that were not shy, handbag shoes, an event ticket that cost more than a week of groceries. I stood very still. I touched nothing. I waited for the urge to speak from anger and let it pass, like a train that does not stop at my station anymore. She came in from the bedroom with her phone in her hand and a smile that looked borrowed. I told her about the envelope. She told me about a sale I asked for her plan. She said she had ideas. I said, ideas do not pay creditors. Plans do. Her face hardened. You are always measuring me. I said, no, I am measuring whether the floor will hold both of us if I keep standing under you. She said, I make her anxious. I said, anxiety is the interest you pay when you borrow from the future. She rolled her eyes because metaphors are boring when you want miracles. I kissed her cheek and left before I spoke a sentence I could not afford. At home, the house stood. With me, walls are loyal when you let them see you as you are. I pulled the ledger closer and wrote what I knew. 17,000 across 18 months. Insurance covered more often than not. Gas when she was between gigs. Tires after the nail that found her on the freeway and a dozen small transfers that wore the costume of emergency and went shopping. Instead, I added a second line under, enough, not my emergency anymore. The phone rang and I let it. I made soup and I ate it at the table without my phone for company. I cleaned the pot and left it to dry on a towel that used to belong to my mother. I let the evening be ordinary and did not rescue it with noise. The next day, Miss Patel called with her voice that always reminds me of a metronome. Steady, polite Ruth. May I call you Ruth? We have not received this month. Would you like to authorize? I took a breath. I told her I would not. She was quiet for a respectful beat, and then she said, thank you for the clarity. We will contact the primary. I said, thank you for contacting the person who should have been primary all along. And I hung up, feeling like I had returned a set of keys to the rightful owner. Lorna clinked our mugs together on the porch that evening. To adult children learning late, she said to mothers, finally letting them, she added. We looked at the sky, which was pretending to be a painting. We did not clap for it. Olivia sent a message with no greeting later that night. You are impossible. I typed a reply that said, I am finished being possible in the ways that hurt me. Then I deleted it. Then I put the phone face down again. I am learning that not every truth needs to be said to be true. In the morning, I opened the blue folder and tucked the red notice behind the word, enough. I wrote a third line. Bring me a plan, not a promise. I left the page open on the table where the light could see it. The kettle sang, I poured. I watched the steam rise the way resolve does, quiet, ordinary, certain. When the knock came at noon, I knew it would be her. She stood on my step with a canvas tote and the look of a child who has practiced her speech on the ride over. She said she had a plan. I said, sit and show me. She pulled out a notebook with a gold spine and numbers that tried to behave. We went through it line by line. We removed the famous faucet. We kept the safe tires. We moved the festival weekend to someday. We kept the job interview blazer for Tuesday. We found money by telling the truth about what was not necessary. She asked about the insurance. Due next week, I said I would pay that one. Last time, because it protects both of us. I said I would not pay the shoes or the brunch or the piece she rents by pretending the bill is not real. She nodded and looked older in a good way. When she left, she did not slam. She said thank you without adding a condition. I cleaned the cups and put them away and let the quiet return to the room as if it had paid admission like everyone else. That night, I wrote a final line for the day under enough. I used to measure love by what I covered. I will now measure it by what I allow others to cover for themselves. I closed the ledger and put it on the shelf where I keep the photos that do not perform for anyone. And for the first time in a long time, I did not dream about due dates. I dreamed about a road that did not ask me to stand still so someone else could move. In the morning, I woke clear and the house faithful witness that it is breathed with me in time. The morning after I wrote the word enough, the world looked exactly the same, but it felt different. The air in my house seemed to respect me a little more, like it could tell a decision had been made and wanted to give it space. I boiled water for tea and stood by the window watching a gull pick at something invisible on the sidewalk. That bird looked like it was arguing with its reflection. I smiled because I knew the feeling. I checked my phone. No new messages from Olivia. No apology. No receipt. No new crisis wearing perfume and urgency. For the first time in years, I felt the calm that follows when a mother stops trying to be the background music to someone else's life. I decided to test the silence. I sent a short message. No more auto payments from my card. Call me when you have a plan, not a promise. I stared at it for a moment before pressing send. Then I put the phone face down on the table and went for a walk around the block. By the time I came back, there were 3 missed calls from her and 1 text from Marcus that said, "Call your daughter. She's upset." I laughed quietly because Marcus only ever calls when someone else is crying. I called her back that evening. Her voice came in hot and fast. "Mom, what are you doing? I could lose my car." I waited for her to run out of breath. Then I said softly, "You mean you could learn what responsibility feels like?" She huffed. "I don't need a lecture. I need support." I said, "No, you need both. But you will only get one from me tonight." There was a long pause, then the sharp edge of accusation. "You're doing this to prove something, aren't you?" I said, "I am doing this to remember something that I am allowed to stop." She hung up. No goodbye, no click. Just silence so heavy, it made the kitchen walls shift. Later, Marcus called. He started with that same line he always used when we were married. "Ruth, let's be reasonable." I told him I was done being reasonable at my own expense. He said she's scared. I said she's capable. He said she's young. I said she's old enough to have a credit card and an opinion about who holds her back, so she's old enough to pay her bills. He sighed. "You've always been too hard on her." I said, "You've always been too soft on yourself." We were quiet after that. I think he realized I was no longer auditioning for his approval. Either days passed. No word from Olivia. Only a letter from First City. Payment past due second notice in red. I pinned it to the fridge, not as a threat, as a reminder that the consequence was hers, not mine. Lorna came by with her usual 2 mugs and the smell of lawn clippings. She saw the notice and raised an eyebrow. She said, "You're really doing it." Then I said, "Doing what?" She said, "Letting her grow," I said. "Trying to." She said, "It's like teaching someone to swim by standing on the shore and believing they won't drown." I said, "It's exactly like that." And we both laughed, but our eyes didn't. The next weekend, I went to the farmer's market. The ordinary rhythm of people exchanging things they earned with their hands felt sacred. I bought tomatoes that still smelled like sunlight. I bought honey from a woman who looked like she'd never apologized for surviving. When I came home, I found an envelope under my door, Olivia's handwriting, inside a note that said, "If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will." I smiled and said good, because she had just written the first adult sentence of her life. For a while, I let her silence be her teacher. I paid my bills, I read, I learned the difference between peace and waiting. Waiting has teeth. Peace does not. One morning, Miss Patel called. Her tone was polite but weary. "Mrs. Delaney, are you aware that your daughter's account is 3 weeks past due?" I said I am aware. She asked if I would like to authorize a backup payment. I said I would not. She hesitated. "You have always been prompt in the past." I said I am trying something new. She chuckled quietly as if she understood more than she should, and said, "I wish you luck, Mrs. Delaney." And for the first time since I met her, I liked her voice. That afternoon, Marcus showed up unannounced. He never visits without a reason, and the reason always wears a mask of concern. He stood in my doorway holding a newspaper, like proof of his virtue. He said, "She's gonna lose that car." I said, "Maybe she should." He said, "You're not helping." I said, "That's the point." He came inside anyway, looked around at my tidy living room and said, "You always did like control." I said, "I like order. It's what keeps the lights on." He said, "She's just like you." I said, "She's just like both of us, which is why she needs one of us to stop pretending money equals mercy." He left shaking his head. Men who mistake boundaries for betrayal never know when to stop performing disappointment. That night, I sat by the window and wrote in my ledger again. Under enough, I added a line. Every rescue comes with a receipt, even if it's written in silence. The next week, Olivia called. Her voice was calm, almost polite. She said, "Can we meet?" I said, "When?" She said, "Now." So I went. She chose a coffee shop again, same table, same window. She looked tired in the way people do when the story they tell about themselves stops working. She said, "I talked to Dad." I said, "I figured you would." She said, "He can't help either." I said, "I know he called me first." Her face tightened. "Why are you doing this to me?" I said, "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just not doing things for you." She crossed her arms. "You make me feel like a failure." I said, "You're not a failure. You're a beginner." She blinked, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to stand on a chair to help me bake, asking if the batter was supposed to be this messy, and I remembered that growth always looks like a mess in the middle. I told her, "Sit down, we'll make a plan." She said, "I don't want a plan." I said, "Then you don't want help." We spent the next hour with her notebook open and her frustration louder than her pen. We listed income, expenses, needs, wants. I drew lines where she drew excuses, and somewhere between cell phone and subscription box, she started crying quietly. I didn't reach across the table. I let her finish. When she looked up, I said softly, "This is what real freedom looks like. It's math, not magic." She said, "You sound like a teacher." I said, "No, like a woman who finally graded her own test." When we finished, she said, "So what happens if I can't make the payment this month?" I said, "Then the car waits the way I waited." She didn't like that answer, but she didn't argue. Later that week, I got another call from Ms. Patel. Her tone was warmer. She said, "I just wanted to inform you, your daughter made a partial payment today." I said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "I thought you'd want to know she's learning." I said, "So am I," after the call. I sat by the window again, the harbor lights blinking like Morse code messages from a version of myself that finally understood boundaries are a kind of love, too. 2 days later, Olivia came by without warning. She had that nervous smile of someone carrying bad news. She said, "I'm late again." I said, "I know." She said, "I hate disappointing you." I said, Then stop. She said, I'm trying. I said, try louder. She laughed through her tears and said, you always know how to make me feel small. I said, maybe I'm trying to make you see scale. You're not small. You're accountable. We stood in the doorway together. For a moment, it felt like old times, but quieter. She said, you really mean to stop bailing me out? I said, yes. She said, even if they take the car, I said. Especially if they take the car. She left angry. I stayed calm. Anger is often a student's way of admitting the lesson is working. Days later, I saw her car parked 2 blocks away. I walked past it slowly. There was a notice tucked under the wiper, delinquent account call to avoid repossession. I kept walking. The sea breeze lifted my hair like applause. That night, Marcus texted, they're coming for the car. You happy now? I wrote back. I'm at peace now. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Olivia standing there. Keys in hand, tears barely held back. She said they took it. I said, I know. She said, what do I do now? I said, you live without a car until you can afford one. You take the bus, you walk, you save. She said, I can't. I said, you can. You just never had to. She looked at me like she wanted to hate me. Then she broke. She cried like the sky finally gave her permission. I let her. When she could breathe again, she whispered, I'm sorry. I said, I know. She said, you must think I'm ungrateful. I said, I think you're learning. That's all I ever wanted. She left lighter than she arrived, and for the first time in years, my kitchen smelled like relief instead of guilt. Later that evening, Ms. Patel called again. She said, the balance is down to $1,500. I said, thank you. She said, do you intend to pay it? I said, no. She said, then who will? I said, the person who drives the car. That night, I wrote a new line in my ledger under enough letting go is an investment with compound returns. I poured tea and watched the reflection of my own steady hand. I realized I had become my own finance officer, and for the first time in a long time, the books of my heart were finally balanced. The morning after they took the car, I woke before the sun. The house was holding its breath, like it knew a new kind of day was waiting. I boiled water for tea and laid my ledger open on the table under the word. Enough. I wrote 2 more words. Next steps, I called First City the minute their lights came on. The phone rang twice. Then the same steady voice came through. Miss Patel speaking. How may I help Ruth Delaney? I said, my daughter is Olivia Delaney. You left the delinquency notices. They repossessed the vehicle last night. I need to understand my options today. There was a pause that felt like a kind nod through the line. Her tone stayed even. Yes, Mrs. Delaney, we do have the vehicle in holding. Balance remaining is $1,500 plus fees for the tow and storage. If the account is brought current today, the title will remain according to contract. However, we can process a transfer under certain conditions, if all parties are present. I said all parties will be present. She said we close at 5. I said I will be there at noon. I sent Olivia a message that did not ask. Meet me at First City at noon. Bring your ID and your attention. No apologies required. No speeches allowed. She read it within a minute. The typing bubble appeared, then went away. 3 times. I put the phone face down and the kettle began to sing. At 11:30, I put on the good cardigan. Not a uniform, a ceremony for clarity. I put my mother's ring box back in the drawer where I keep old photographs. Then I closed the drawer. Like you close a chapter, you have finally understood. The lobby of First City felt like every lobby where people try to look calm beside their worry plastic plants that tried to be brave chairs that asked you to sit with dignity posters that promised fairness. I stood at the counter and said my name without apology. Miss Patel looked up with recognition. That was not pity. She said, "Thank you for coming in person." I said, "Thank you for naming the cost every time I tried to hide from it." Olivia arrived late by 10 breaths, hair pulled into a knot that had lost the argument, eyes rimmed in the red of last night's truth. She did not hug me. She sat, we waited. Miss Patel invited us into a small glass room where numbers behave, because there is nowhere to run. She placed the file on the table. Inside it, a neat tower of months that told the story we kept trying not to read. She explained the options with that careful voice that never pretended to be a hug. Redeem the vehicle today, pay balance and fees, reinstatement of loan, possible or alternate path, a transfer of title upon payoff, with signed agreement between you and your daughter. I said we will choose the path that builds a spine, not a crutch. She nodded as if she had expected that sentence from me all along. Olivia stared at the table, her hands twisted together like two people who wanted to leave and could not. She said, "I do not understand why we are here if you refuse to rescue me." I said, "We are here because rescue is not the same as repair. Today is repair." I opened my ledger, took out a check, wrote the number that would make this phase end. My hand was steady. My voice was steady, too. I said to Miss Patel, "This payment is from me. I request transfer of title to my name today. I will draft a private agreement with my daughter for monthly repayment. Upon completion of that agreement, the title will return to her. Until then, the vehicle is my asset, and her permission to use it will depend on evidence, not promises." Olivia looked like I had just taken air from the room. She said, "You are stealing my car." I said, "I am doing the first accurate transaction between us. You used my money to keep it moving. Now my name will match the facts." She pushed back from the table, anger rising fast. "You are humiliating me." I said, "This room is private. This process is lawful, and humiliation is what we feel when pride meets truth without makeup. Sit." She sat because even fury knows when it needs a chair. Marcus arrived uninvited like weather that ignores forecasts. He wore the look of a man ready to perform diplomacy without bringing funds. He said, "Let us be reasonable. Ruth, is this necessary? Olivia, tell your mother you will do better and let us go home." I did not turn to him. I kept my eyes on my daughter. "No more mediators," I said. "No more speeches that die before they touch a bill. Marcus, you have enjoyed my patience for years today. I am fresh out. Sit down if you want to witness a correction, or leave if you prefer your version of us." He sat the room adjusted to the weight of 3 histories, finally telling the truth. Miss Patel slid the papers toward me, then toward Olivia. "There can be no confusion," she said, "signatures here and here. Each line means exactly what it says. We do not practice poetry at First City." I almost smiled. She reminded me of the best nurses I knew, facts carried with dignity. I signed first. Olivia hesitated. She whispered, "I hate you." I said, "I accept your feeling. I will not finance it." She closed her eyes, then she signed. The pen left a small trace of ink on her thumb, like a stamp from a door she had finally walked through. The payment cleared. The receipt printed. The title transfer processed into a stack of papers that looked heavier than they were. Ms. Patel said the vehicle is ready for release. "Would you like us to bring it around?" I said, "Yes, please." She reached across the table and touched the folder with 2 fingers, a gesture like a benediction for grown-ups. She said, "I hope you both have a calmer month." I said, "We will have an honest one." In the parking lot, the car waited with the innocence of an object that has never asked to be a symbol. Olivia stood beside me, arms crossed, breath shallow. I opened the driver door and sat. She flinched. "That is my seat." I said, "It is my car for now," swallowed. "Can I ride with you?" I said, "Yes. I do not want you walking home with this much learning in your body." We drove in a silence that had stopped pretending to be peaceful. At a light, her voice came small and raw. "You do not trust me." I said, "Not yet." Trust is a savings account. It grows with deposits. We've been trying to live on overdraft, protection, and compliments. When we reached my house, I parked in my driveway, not hers. The gesture mattered. We sat there, hands still on our laps, as if sudden movement could break the day. I said, "Here is the agreement. You will transfer to me $350 on the first of every month. You will send a screenshot of the transfer. You will keep insurance current and send proof. You will send odometer readings on the 15th, so I know you are not joyriding through the boundaries. If a payment is missed, the keys sleep here until the account is current. When the balance equals what I paid the title, returns to you, and our ledger becomes a clean page." Her face flushed at odometer readings. She said, "You are treating me like a teenager." I said, "I am treating you like a borrower who has not yet finished becoming a partner." She took the keys from my hand like they were heavier than steel. She stared at the house as if it had chosen sides. Then she asked the question that mattered. "Can I do this?" I looked at her face, the same face that once pressed against my shoulder, while I counted her fever breaths. "Yes, you can," I said. "Not because it will be easy, because it will be inevitable if you do not keep telling yourself the old story where you are always caught right before you hit the ground." She exhaled a sound like someone opening a window from the inside. She said, "I will try." I said, "Try with a calendar, not with a feeling." She left without hugging me, which is often how adults show courage for the first time. The engine sounded different as she pulled away, not triumphant, not ashamed, just sober. Marcus came around the hedge a minute later. Apparently, he had parked down the street to be available for applause. He said that was dramatic. I said that was math. He said, "She will never forgive you." I said, "She will thank me when she is done hating the mirror." He shook his head and said, "I do not recognize you anymore." I said, "That is because I finally look like myself, inside." I placed the new title folder in the drawer where the family documents live. Birth certificates, deeds, a stack of photographs where we still believed holidays solved anything. I left the drawer open for a moment so the past could see the new tenant. Then I closed it gently. That evening, Olivia sent a message. Not long, not decorated. First payment scheduled for the first screenshot attached. I wrote back. Received. Thank you, no hearts, no confetti. Just the new language of our house. 2 days later, Emily the friend with expensive shoes appeared like a complication in a soap opera. She knocked with the rhythm of someone who has never had to wait. When I opened the door, she launched into a speech. Without making eye contact, Ruth. "You are being too intense. Liv is spiraling. We should all just pitch in and clear this so she can breathe." I let her words finish falling to the welcome mat. Then I said, "Breathe is not what she needs. She needs lungs. Help that arrives. Without a lesson. Leaves people gasping on the next hill." Emily blinked, as if the air had changed brands. She said, "You used to be nicer." I said, "I used to be available." She left without offering to pay, which told me everything about her love language. On the third day, Miss Patel called one more time. Her tone had a thread of warmth woven into the firm cloth. I wanted to let you know, Miss Delaney, that the reinstatement is complete. Account status shows new activity from the primary. She paused. Not hesitation, permission. You did a hard thing. Well, I said you did too. Thank you for never making me feel small while you described the size of the problem. She laughed softly and said, my mother taught me to discuss money as if it were weather real predictable and not more important than the people standing in it. A week passed, then another. On the first morning, my phone buzzed at 7. A screenshot, 350, moved from Olivia to me. Below it, a photo of her breakfast eggs on toast, made at home caption, learning to spend on purpose. I sat at the table and smiled at the plain honesty of a meal you can afford. Budget Friday began as a joke and turned into a ritual. She came at 6 with a notebook that now had coffee stains and sober numbers. I made tea. We sat on the floor because chairs felt like old news. We wrote income at the top. Then the 3 categories that keep adults awake or let them sleep must, should, could. We moved streaming to. Could we move tires to? Must we kept one small line for what she called sanity, and I called herbs. We argued politely about the cost of good shoes and the price of bad ones. We ended the night with a list taped inside her cabinet. Not rules, reminders. Pay yourself first, even if it is a little. Call the lender before they call you. Joy that fits in a jar like coins is still joy. Marcus called to offer an apology that sounded like a receipt that had been stuck in a pocket through the wash. Ruth, I am sorry I did not teach her. I advised from the sidelines and clapped at the wrong times. I said, write that down, send it to her. He did. She forwarded me the message under it. She wrote, he is learning. I wrote back, so are we. There was a stumble in week 3. An old habit returned, wearing a new dress. She asked if she could skip the payment and make it up next month. I said no. She said, please. I said no. She cried with the quiet fury of a person arguing with gravity. Then she sent the payment anyway and texted, I felt sick. Then I felt better. I replied, that is the body learning time. On a gray morning that smelled like rain, I drove past a bus stop and saw my daughter waiting, head up phone, away, breath steady. She did not see me. I did not stop. I let the bus carry her where she had chosen to go, and I let the pride be private because some joys are stronger when they are not shared right away. At the end of the month, I opened my ledger and slid a new page beneath the old one. $17,000 paid across 18 months. Then the repossession, then the redemption, then the transfer. Then the first 4 payments back to me. Proof is not loud, it is cumulative. Olivia came by with a small plant as if to return the oxygen I used on her. She set it on my windowsill and said, I am learning to be boring in the way responsible people are, and it feels like peace. I said, good boring is how the lights stay on while your spirit figures out its art. She stood in the doorway and finally asked the question I had been waiting for since the day in the cafe. Do you think I can be trusted again? Not by you, by me, I took her hand. Trust is a habit. I said make deposits. Watch it grow. Do not spend it on people who clap for you more than they care for you. She nodded the way a student nods when the answer is not easy, but it is finally clear. That night, I slept without rehearsing conversations with creditors or children. The house exhaled at the same pace as my chest. Outside the harbor, lights blinked in a rhythm I understood. Message received, course corrected. Keep going. It has been 2 months since the day in that glass office when I signed my name under a new kind of promise. The car sits where it belongs at night, sometimes in her driveway, sometimes in mine, depending on who kept their word that week. Life has settled into a rhythm that feels like recovery, not celebration. The way an old house hums again after the storm leaves, but the paint still remembers the wind. Olivia pays her $350 on the first of every month on time, with proof. The first few transfers, she would add emojis, like apologies. Now she just sends the number plain clean, like an adult. I print the receipts and tuck them in the blue folder, my quiet monument to progress. On Fridays, she still comes for budget night. We sit at my kitchen table with tea that cools too fast and a notebook that fills too slow. She has learned to call things by their real names, savings, debt goals for a long time. She called them all dreams. Now she calls them categories. I prefer the new language. Sometimes Marcus joins for dinner. He brings store-bought salad and a face that tries to hide its relief. He and Olivia talk about things that do not cost money, recipes, news, the sound of the gulls by the marina. When he leaves, he thanks me. I tell him the thanks belongs to the calendar and the payments, not to me. Even Emily reappeared once, a brief visit, full of perfume and caution. She looked at Olivia and said, "You have changed." Olivia said I had to, and Emily smiled in that thin way. People smile when they realize someone is no longer available for rescue. I walked them to the door and thought about how strange it is that growth always makes your old circle smaller, but your world larger. The car itself has become less of a symbol and more of a tool. Olivia drives it to work, to errands, sometimes to my house on Sundays, when she brings groceries and the kind of gossip that is harmless. She never calls it mine or hers anymore. She calls it the car neutral ground. I like that. Last week, she brought an envelope. Inside was a handwritten balance sheet, her debts, her savings, her goals for the next year, and at the bottom a small note that said, "For the first time in my life, I do not feel backed into a corner. I feel backed by myself." I kept that note on the fridge right next to the final notice from months ago that started this whole chapter. They look good side by side, past and progress, cause and effect. Lorna came over yesterday and saw it. She said, "That folder of yours must be getting heavy." I said, "It is, but not with numbers anymore, with meaning." She smiled the smile of a woman who knows that weight can be holy when it's chosen. Sometimes I still hear that sentence in my head, "Mom, you hold me back." It arrives like a ghost, but not an unkind one, and I answer it the same way every time, "No." "Olivia, I was holding the door. You just hadn't noticed it was open." There are nights when the house is too quiet even for peace. I light a candle and let the wax remember what warmth feels like. I think about the versions of me that existed before. Enough, the bookkeeper, the widow, the mother who mistook pain for presence. I thank them all, they got me here. Last Sunday, Olivia stayed for dinner, roast chicken again because some circles are worth repeating. When we finished, she helped with dishes. Without being asked halfway through, she said, "I think I understand you now." I said, "I doubt that." She laughed. "No, I get why you stopped. You weren't punishing me. You were letting me build a floor." I said, "That's right." And she said quietly, "It's sturdy now." After she left, I opened my ledger for what I think will be the last entry under enough I wrote. Balance settled, not because the money is done, because the lesson finally earned its interest. I sat back and realized this was not about the car. It was about cost, the invisible kind. The toll of constant rescuing, the price of being too reliable. It was about learning to love her without losing myself in the transaction. The moon rose, the kettle whistled, and for the first time since Marcus left, since Olivia grew up, since I started keeping ledgers for hearts instead of clients, I felt free of audit. If someone asked me what changed, I would say nothing and everything. I still live in the same house. I still drink the same tea. I still check the mail each morning. But I no longer flinch at bills with my name, because I know now they are mine and mine alone. Love should never be a line item. It should be the margin you protect while you balance what matters. Tonight before bed, I will write a small note and leave it in the blue folder, not for Olivia, for myself. It will say, "You are allowed to keep what you have earned. You are allowed to rest without owing. You are allowed to stop. The house will breathe with me. The night will settle, and the ledger, faithful witness that it is, will finally close itself. If you paid $17,000 for your child's freedom, and they said you hold me back, would you keep paying for peace or draw the line for respect? Tell me what you would do. Your story might steady someone tonight.